These are concluding questions and answers from both of you. Swami Atmarupananda, what can yoga practitioners utilize in Advaita Vedanta?
Yes, that's a good question from both sides. From the yoga side, learning from Vedanta, and the Vedanta side, learning from yoga. Let me first start with a saying of the great Meister Eckhart. Those of you, most of you probably have heard of him, but those of you who have not, he was a great German Christian mystic who lived between the 13th and 14th centuries. That is, no, between the 13th and between the 14th and 15th. That is the 1300s into the early 1400s. A great Advaitic Christian mystic, and he said once that any two spiritual ideas, if they are genuinely true, there's some meeting between them. That is, there's not an ultimate contradiction between any two spiritual ideas. And that has helped me a great deal in when I find spiritual ideas that seem to be contradictory. I've always found so far, and has given me the faith that it's true in general, that either one of them is not genuinely a spiritual idea, which means it's not an experiential idea. It may be a dogma, it may be a belief or something, but it's not an experiential idea. It came from the human mind rather than from human experience. But otherwise, the different ideas there can always be a meeting place found between them. And so with yoga and Advaita Vedanta, it's very easy. And I could say Vedanta in general, including the devotional schools of Vedanta, there is a meeting point, a natural meeting point. But for simplicity's sake, let me stick to Advaita Vedanta. So what can the yogins, the yoga tradition, learn from Advaita? One of the things I would say is, and this was something that is indicated in Swami Vivekananda's thought. It's just that when he taught Raja Yoga, he generally stuck to actual Patanjala yoga. And when he was speaking of Vedanta, he said from the Vedantic standpoint. But at times in his book on Raja Yoga, you can see where the inspiration is breaking down within his own mind the barriers between the traditions. And so, as Swami Sarvapriyananda said yesterday, his text on Raja Yoga is a unique document because he gives the basic traditional yoga knowledge, but at times you find him breaking out of that. And so what he broke out of from time to time, and outside of Raja Yoga, which he broke out of all of the time, was the ultimate dualism of yoga. That is, that there's a Purusha and there's Prakriti. The two are absolutely real, and they are completely different, and they are eternal. So the Advaitic idea of the dependence of Prakriti on Brahman, that is, that Prakriti, as it's often called as Maya, that it can't exist without Brahman, but Brahman is completely independent. Brahman exists without Maya, but Maya does not exist without Brahman. That idea of the appearance nature of Prakriti as opposed to the absolute reality of Prakriti would be a great clarification in the yoga system and very helpful in the practice, I believe. A second thing is the absence of an ultimate unity in the yoga system. The Advaitic perception of the ultimate non-dual nature of truth, which in simple terms is unity, but a more technically appropriate term is non-duality, but the basic unity of existence. As I said yesterday, it's a strange fact of religious history that the great sages of the yoga tradition, they attained to the knowledge of the Purusha, the knowledge of themselves as infinite consciousness, but they didn't attain to the knowledge, at least as far as the record goes, the teachings go, they didn't attain to the knowledge that I am reality itself, that I am Brahman, that there is one Purusha, and that I am, and that thou art also. Those two are, as I see it, the greatest shortcomings in the yoga system. Admittedly, I'm speaking from the Vedantic position rather than the yogic position, but I speak from that because that seems to me the ultimate truth that one can't avoid if one looks at the whole record of spiritual experience. That the ultimate goal is nothing short of unity. Let me just say one other thing, not directly to the question here, but sort of as background for what I just said. I have a friend who's a Buddhist scholar and practitioner. He's about my age, a little bit older. He's a PhD in Buddhist studies. He studied with the Dalai Lama and others. A very fine man and a very, very sincere man and a dear friend of mine. We've argued many times, friendly arguments, philosophical arguments about the harmony or disharmony in ultimate religious experience. I presenting Sri Ramakrishna's idea that there must be a fundamental unity at the top of spiritual experience. And he presents the other side. He argues vehemently that no, Christian enlightenment is one thing, Buddhist enlightenment is another, Hindu Vedanta is another, Islamic experience is another. They all lead to their own goals, which are completely separate. Now that to me is completely unsatisfying, because then we're each ending up in a ghetto where nobody can claim that I've experienced the truth because your truth is contradicting my truth. And so there must be an ultimate unity. And so coming back to yoga and Vedanta, that is what I see as the greatest weakness in the yoga system, is the ultimate reality and separation of Prakriti, and the distinction of all of the eternal distinction and separation of all of the Purushas. So that's more on this standpoint of philosophy than practice. But I won't go on further to issues of practice.
Thank you, Swami. Swami Sarvapriyananda, what can Vedanta utilize in yoga? What can Vedanta practitioners utilize?
Yes. I like this saying that that the opposite of a petty truth is falsehood, but the opposite of a great truth is another great truth. So if non-dualism is a great truth, then its opposite is dualism, and that's also another great truth. So it may sound contradictory or mystifying, but it's often the case that because of the nature of the ultimate reality, which is infinite, it can reconcile apparent contradictions. These are contradictions appearing to our intellect. So what seems like non-dualism to us, what seems like dualism to us, both may be true ultimately, because they lead you to the same realization. But I agree with the Swami. I've come across this again and again, especially it's academically fashionable now, that to say that, no, earlier it was like all religions are false except one, and that somehow happens to be mine. That was the argument earlier. But then it became either a very materialistic approach, secular approach, that all religions are false, finished. Or we are not saying all religions are true, but they're different. I've never understood that, if they're obviously religions are different. Even the names of the religions are different. The practices are different. The geographical locations, the foundations, histories, everything is different. But that the claim is that they ultimately lead to the same ultimate reality. So this claim, which is Sri Ramakrishna says that, and I firmly believe in that, and that's what is called the perennial philosophy, that there is an ultimate reality to which all the great traditions of the world point to. Practices may be different, approaches, philosophies may be different, but they point to that. If you say that your practices lead you to different realizations, and they're true, I'm assuming you're claiming that these are true. In that case, I don't understand. What are you arguing for? Are you arguing for polytheism? That would be a strange thing for a Jewish person or a Christian person or an Islamic person to. If an Islamic scholar says, no, my practices lead me to this Islamic realization, and that's different from all of your other realizations. And if they're all true, presumably, then there are multiple realities. So you're now arguing for, this is completely against the spirit of the great monotheistic religions. So I think this is, I don't know where it comes from. I think it's just a marriage of the old religious fanaticism on one hand, and a modern kind of postmodern, approach of trying to differentiate everything and trying to knock down any kind of underlying oneness. Maybe. I think it's both poor religion and poor academics, basically. All right. What can Vedanta get from yoga? A lot, as it turns out. There have been two movements here in classical Advaita Vedanta. One, to reject yoga. So sort of push back against yoga. If you see in Shankara, and Shankara at one place in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya says, after a long argument against Sankhya, against basically the dualism of Sankhya, and that basically his main objection is Prakriti is the source of the universe. And he wants to say, no, Brahman is the source of the universe. And then he said, by this rejection of Sankhya, yoga too is rejected. Shankara says that in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, which generations of non-dualists have taken to mean that the philosophy of yoga is rejected, but the practices are welcome. So this is what Advaita Vedanta has always done. I say, I have joked, and once in a while I've got a pushback about this also, but I'll still tell you the joke. It's that it has borrowed the best products of all the different philosophical systems in India, ancient philosophies. From Nyaya, we, the non-dualists, took the method of logical argumentation, the Anumana system. From the Sankhya, we took the concept of pure consciousness, Purusha, the being of limitless consciousness. And also at the transactional plane, the entire cosmology is borrowed from Sankhya. From yoga, we borrowed the entire system of meditation, all the techniques of meditation completely taken from yoga. And then from Mimamsa, Purva Mimamsa, the entire system of interpreting the Vedas, especially the Upanishads, the hermeneutical devices, how to interpret a text. The whole system is taken, they're all developed by Purva Mimamsa. It's taken wholesale by Shankaracharya and often used against the Purva Mimamsakas. Now, put them all together, and then on top of that, you put Brahman on top of that, say Tattvamasi, and this is Advaita Vedanta. Inside it, all the technologies which are working have been developed by other systems. So, yogic meditation has long been welcome in Advaita Vedanta. So, when you read, for example, the Vedanta Sara of Sadananda Yogendra, which is the introductory text studied by newcomers. If you traditionally want to learn Advaita Vedanta, the first book you are asked to study is the Vedanta Sara for the last 600 years. So there, after finishing the entire Vedantic teaching, Shravana, Manana, Nididhyasana, everything has been done. After Nididhyasana, he launches into a complete description of Ashtanga Yoga, about Yama, Niyama, everything is mentioned there. It's totally, it's copied from the Patanjali Yoga system. And this is the introductory text to Advaita Vedanta. So it was part of orthodoxy, post-Shankara orthodoxy. It became part of that. In Panchadashi, even to some extent in Viveka Chudamani, in a little bit in Drigdrishya Viveka, in many of these, you will find yogic meditation techniques have been incorporated. In fact, so much so that I think the question should be not what Vedanta can take from yoga. It's like, where does it stop? It has gone so far, I think it's gone too much. The pendulum has swung to the other extreme, where yoga and Vedanta are conflated. Even in the minds of people who are unwary, they think Vedanta means Nirvikalpa Samadhi. I saw a very scholarly article which blamed us, especially Swami Vivekananda, for propagating the idea that Nirvikalpa Samadhi and Vedanta. He never said that, but because he spoke about Raja Yoga, spoke about Samadhi, and spoke about attaining knowledge, somehow in the minds of people, these have been conflated. They are not the same thing. Though practice of Samadhi has long been an honored part of a Vedantic monk's repertoire of spiritual practices, but it is not the same thing. So that is one of the reasons why I often try to say, whenever I'm given the opportunity, what Vedanta is not. First distinguish it, separate it, and then you can synthesize it again. One interesting text I found in this regard was Madhusudana Saraswati, I think in chapter 4, I forget where, or chapter 6, where he suddenly launches into a difference, into difference between yoga and Vedanta. He says, for the followers of Hiranyagarbha, very interesting. Hiranyagarbha is one of the names of Kapila. So for the followers of Hiranyagarbha who consider the world to be real, there is no other way of escaping from the world appearance other than erasing it in samadhi. And they must practice samadhi. Then he says, but for the followers of the Vedic path, the venerable commentator, that is the venerable Shankaracharya, has not prescribed yogic meditation. He says an inquiry into the Vedic statements is enough. And then he says, enough said, back to our subject. So it's a very interesting indication of how the struggle was going on inside Advaita circles at that time. Clearly, karma is useful, bhakti is useful, yoga is useful, and they all form almost a necessary foundation for Vedanta practices. But the uniqueness of the Vedanta practices themselves, Shravana, Manana, and Nididhyasana, have to be recognized. Just one more point. Aparoksha Anubhuti, at the end, there are 15 practices. If the book is by Shankaracharya, as it in the tradition it is. So 15 practices recommended, meditation practices recommended by Adi Shankaracharya in Aparoksha Anubhuti, where he takes all yogic terms, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi, and adds a few more. And all those 15 terms are yogic terms. And he gives each of them a Vedantic interpretation. So the idea is to show that the Vedantic idea of meditation is not the yogic idea of meditation. And then at the end, he says, this is not to disparage yogic practices. To begin with, the yogic practices are enormously valuable. He says that at the end of distinguishing the two. Yogic practices are enormously valuable to a beginner's mind, and then come these Vedantic practices. Okay.
Swami Atmarupananda, would you like to add anything to that?
Let me just add to what he says, because he mentioned Madhusudana Saraswati, that an interesting thing about Madhusudana's commentary on the Gita, Gurhartha Deepika, as it's called, that there he shows that he was a master of Patanjala yoga system also. So I don't say that to contradict what the Swami said at all. I agree with that. And also I wanted to add that when I say that yoga would do well to come to an ultimate Vedantic understanding of reality, I don't think that we are served well by just collapsing everything into one homogeneous system. There are differences because there are different approaches, different types of psychology, and so forth. And so yoga has its own approach, and that is good. So I just want to affirm that I don't think that yoga should be collapsed into jnana yoga so that there's no yoga left anymore. Yoga serves a particular type, especially the type of person who wants a recipe for spiritual life. If you tell a person you are the self, you know that you exist, just find out who you are, that's wonderful and beautiful in its simplicity and completely useless to certain types of people. And so there need to be different approaches, different ideals, different ways of seeing spirituality. The yogic approach needs to be maintained, and as the Swami rightly said, the jnana approach needs to be seen in itself. And then if we find it helpful to combine them, that we can do. But it's good to know that this is an approach and this is an approach. And they can also, if you wish, be combined.
Very good. Let's move on to the last question. The ultimate reality in yoga and Vedanta, are they the same?
Okay.
Swami Atmarupananda.
So I'll begin. And that's an excellent question, a difficult question to answer. Let me say that yoga, as it is traditionally understood in the Yoga Sutras, I would say that it approaches non-dualism, but it never quite gets there. That is because they're left with the idea of the Purushas as many and as separate from an eternally real and present Prakriti. And so as I see it, they're coming close to to a realization of non-dualism, but they never quite get there. Let me say on the wider issue of realities of different religions, like the Allah of the Muslims and the Christian God and Jesus and the Jewish Yahweh, etc., Taoism, Buddhism, Vedanta. Both the Swami and I, both of us were talking in the last few minutes about the idea that, well, different religions teach different things. And so are they ultimately different? Do they lead to different realities? Or is there one reality which expresses itself in different ways? And so, of course, I don't think anyone will be terribly shocked. No one will be fainting to hear that I, of course, fully accept and believe in Sri Ramakrishna's principle that all religions lead to the same reality, but that doesn't mean that we're all sort of plunged into a uniform soup at the end of our spiritual progress. Sri Ramakrishna himself said that there are some who belong to the realm of God with form, and even if they're offered Nirvikalpa Samadhi, they won't accept it. There are others who belong to the realm of the divine without form, and who don't like the idea of establishing a relationship and a playful attitude with God and remaining as the eternal playmate of God that doesn't attract them at all. And so those are just two of the modes. Sri Ramakrishna always said that God is with form, God is without form, and infinitely beyond both. And no one can say all that God is. So Sri Ramakrishna's teaching that all religions lead to the same truth doesn't mean that the followers of all different religions are experiencing the same reality in the same way. Experiencing the same reality, yes, but in different ways, because there are many, many different manifestations. But an important thing Sri Ramakrishna also said in two of his analogies. One was of the dye. You put a cloth in a vat of dye. There was a man who dyed clothes for people. And whatever color they wanted, he'd put it in the same vat and pull it out with a different color. But the person who, the wise person observing all of this came and said, I want the color that's in the vat. That means I want that which is beyond all of these manifestations, the reality itself. And the other example is that of the chameleon, that some person sees the chameleon when it's blue, another sees it when it's green, another one sees it when it's brown. But the man who lives under the tree on which the chameleon lives, he knows the chameleon and knows all of the manifestations of the chameleon. And so Sri Ramakrishna's teaching can't be understood, I don't think, without understanding that there is the depth, the reality of the infinite, and the manifestations of the infinite. And it's only from the standpoint of the depth, reality of the infinite that the manifestations can be seen as harmonious. If we only know the outside edges of the divine, then we may not see the inner harmony.
Very wonderful. Thank you, Swami. Swami Sarvapriyananda. Oh, so sorry. Let me get you unmuted here.
Yes, yes. I think really the last word on this matter is what Swami Atmarupanji just said. Very wonderful way of relating Sri Ramakrishna's ultimate teachings about the harmony of religions and the oneness of religions also. What does it mean to be different and one at the same time? I am reminded of a talk that I gave at the University of Delhi many, many years ago on consciousness in Vedanta and there was consciousness in Buddhism. There was a Lama who gave a talk on consciousness in Buddhism. After the talk, a lady, Indian lady, said to the Lama, probably she had been attending the Tibetan Lama's classes, and said, but what you say and what the Swami said, it sounds like the same thing. And the Lama was saying, no, different, And then I said, yes, there are different paths, our usual paths up the mountainside, different path, but leading up to the same mountaintop, they all lead up to the same goal ultimately. The paths are different. And then the Lama, very sweetly, of course, very gentle, he said, yes, then same, and after that, different again. So we'll not give up the distance. About yoga and Vedanta, as the Swami said, philosophically, first of all, philosophically, academically speaking, from the point of view of the darshanas, so there are major differences, which is why Shankaracharya sets out to refute Sankhya and therefore yoga also. Yoga talks about multiplicity of Purushas, pure consciousnesses, and the entire universe being produced by an ultimately real Prakriti. So from there to Advaita Vedanta requires two steps. One is collapsing all the pure consciousnesses into one pure consciousness and reducing Prakriti into nothing other than the power of that pure consciousness. So that one pure consciousness is Brahman and Prakriti is the power of that Brahman called Maya. So the product of Prakriti is an appearance in Maya. It also means that the world is real in yoga philosophy and Sankhya philosophy. In Advaita Vedanta, the world is an appearance. Practically, however, it both work to liberate the individual sentient being from the realm of suffering. One monk in the Himalayas, he put it this way. I'll tell you the Hindi later on. The English is that whether it is a theatrical performance or a movie, we will decide later. But one thing, know it for sure, you are not part of it. You are the witness. So if it's a Broadway performance, there's actually a stage and there are actual actors with actual props playing, presenting the play. In that case also, you're not part of the play. You are in the audience, you are watching. You're not involved in any of the tragedies or comedies or what's going on there. You are the witness. But if it's not a play, if it's actually a movie, in a movie, there are no real actors. There are no real props. It's just lights and pictures and sound. Even there, you're not part of it. You are the witness of it. So he says in both cases, the first thing to understand is you are consciousness, the witness of the world illusion or the game of the world. The first case is Sankhya and yoga, where it's an actual play from which you are separated. Prakriti's play, and you are the witness of it. The second case is Advaita Vedanta, where the entire world is an appearance. Of course, there the movie is also inside you, in the case of the Advaita Vedanta. In one case, it's a Broadway play. In another case, it's a movie, Netflix movie. But in both cases, you are safe from it. You are not a part of it. It does not affect you. This has to be realized.
Beautiful. Do you have any other concluding remarks before we have our final ceremony of the waving of the lights? Either one of you.
Not I.
Swami?
One great Pandit I met, I keep forgetting his name. He was the president of the Howrah Pandit Samaj many years ago. He was 90 plus when I met him, hard of hearing, but I had heard of his reputation. So I asked him a question. You had to shout the question into his ear. He was a master of Vedanta, Sankhya, Yoga, and 7 different philosophies. So I shouted the question into his ear. What is the real, is there a real difference between Sankhya Yoga and Advaita Vedanta? Sankhya philosophy, yogic philosophy on one hand, and Advaita Vedanta. And he heard me like this, and he answered in one sentence. In Bengali, he also shouted back, though I was not hard of hearing. He shouted back, Drishtikoner Parthakya, a difference of perspective. That's all he said. So you make with what you do.
Very nice. Well, friends, this brings us to the end of our 2-day workshop. You have been very much a part of this. We are so grateful to our two Swamis. They have brought a tremendous amount of knowledge and real joy to this workshop. It is a worship, and it's been a worship of the divine light, that pure consciousness. And so we end our workshops every year with a ceremony called Arati, the waving of the lights. And that is, we begin by waving the lights to the symbols of pure consciousness, the highest symbols that we can see with the physical eye, Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother, Sarada Devi, Vivekananda. And this wall is a giclée of Jesus Christ. And on this wall of Lord Buddha, representing 3 of the major religions. And then we also turn and wave the light to you as temples of the divine light. So we will begin that ceremony.